Welcome to our series, The Battle for Public Education in the 21st Century. I'm Ken Yale, education correspondent for Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio.
Yeah, feel this from the bottom of my heart, y'all. Truly inspired. Here we go, come on, look, yo, just teaching to the test. Forced by the feds, or they losing that check. Too many children left behind by this corporate assembly line. How they privatize education is a human right, and they kids gonna be fine. They send them to private schools while ours get sent to prison or given a job serving fast food.
Last week we looked at how social justice education shifts from a standardized to a student-centered approach. Today we'll examine another big paradigm shift. Our show is entitled Eurocentrism to Cultural Empowerment. We'll focus on what it looks like when teachers have deep respect for the diverse cultures of students and their families. And we'll explore what teachers of all backgrounds can do to increase their cultural proficiency. Last program ended in the dynamic classroom of Dr. Chela Delgado, a teacher at Coliseum College Prep Academy in Oakland. We join her as she describes the challenge of becoming a social justice educator.
The teaching population is still 90% white and female nationally. And as our student population in public schools is and continues to be majority kids of color, I think that it can feel really intimidating to come into a classroom and feel stymied about how you can do social justice education when you don't have that kind of natural identity connection with your students. And I want to say, despite being a person of color, despite being from Oakland, there's tons of things I don't share with my students, right? I was raised middle class. I was raised with a lot of privilege. I'm queer and I'm out to my students. There's a lot of separation in our lives. And I think that a lot of the models for social justice classrooms that I saw when I first was figuring out my own pedagogy were men of color talking about how they related to their students and how they shared elements of their students' lives. And I think it's taken me a long time to figure out how I can have my own style of social justice classroom. I just want to say it's possible, and I've certainly seen white teachers achieve it. I think there's also a lot of questions about whether white teachers can hold that kind of space for kids of color, and absolutely they can. They have to work on it often harder, but they can.
Dr. Sean Genright agrees. He's Associate Professor of Education in the Africana Studies Department at San Francisco State University. I caught up with him at the Alameda County Summit for Youth Justice and Education.
How much time are we spending changing the perceptions we have of young people of color? So it's not just that we build a curriculum, but the interchange between a teacher and a student is largely about what teachers believe about the students that they teach. Much of what we've done in education has so much focus on the technical aspects of education, but we haven't done much around the relational aspects. It's not as clear cut as if you put a black teacher in a black classroom or a black and Latino classroom, that solves the problem. It's relational. I've seen white teachers who have deep concern and humane investments in young people of color. The young people tell me, I feel you. I feel you. And they say it so literally because they feel, right? They feel the love, they feel accepted, they feel safe, they feel at home, right? And so relational investments and relationships make the significant difference, and they allow for young people to make the kind of academic changes that are necessary in urban schools.
Dr. Rochelle Rogers RD manages Teach Tomorrow in Oakland, a program that recruits diverse teachers for the Oakland Unified School District. She believes that educators must do a better job of recruiting and retaining teachers of color, and that teachers of all backgrounds can learn to teach with more cultural respect and proficiency.
If we're looking at a nation whose demographics are changing, and if we're looking at the fact that many of our students are not seeing themselves in the folks who are teaching them, it's incumbent upon us to start looking at who do we value as the holders of knowledge, and more importantly, who's really going to be in front of our children. Whenever I talk about this, people say, oh, great, what we need black teachers for black children, and we need Latino teachers for Latino children. And I am saying exactly the opposite. I'm saying we need a diverse group of individuals who are delivering knowledge to a diverse group of students. And my daughter, who's African American, always asks me, why have I not had a Latino teacher? I'm in the 10th grade. I'm in Oakland. I know what the demographics are. And she always goes, not even for Spanish, Mom? Really? We do need to create pipelines for teachers of color. There are programs that are doing this work, but again, it's super, super small. We have to push through the barriers The number one barrier for teachers of color in California is the CSET, which is the subject matter competency exam, because we understand that exams are inherently racist. There is absolutely no correlation between people who pass CSET and how effective they are in the classroom. The other thing is that principals and hiring managers who really want to work with teachers of color are going to have to look in non-traditional spaces. Some of the things that I think force people out, the sense of isolation. Even in today's society, we have a reservation system, usually for white middle-class female teachers. And so when you're talking about recruiting folks of color, many times I have placed teachers at school sites where they are actually desegregating faculty. So if you are the one or the only at a school site, that can be very isolating. If you're the only Black male on the school site, it's a heaviness that you carry. You have to represent, and every time a Black male is in trouble or every time there's a situation, you're called in because you need to represent that demographic. That's very, very heavy for a lot of teachers and very, very huge for African American men who are around 1% of our nation's teachers, and of course for Latino men who are less than 1%.
So what should a culturally empowering social justice education offer to students? I asked Dr. Miguel Lopez, Associate Professor of Multicultural and Social Justice Education at California State University, Monterey Bay.
Think about education, not just in that traditional sense of what's between the earlobes, the academic world that we often think about. We forget the whole child. We talk about that often. But if you look at the vast majority of the work that we do, even the great teachers, there's still such an emphasis on this head part, not so much on the soul, not so much on the body. The dropping of recess and physical education has taken away the physical. The movement towards reading and writing, which are absolutely essential skills, has moved us away from thoughtfulness about what are the values we want our children to understand. In Spanish, we often think about the notion of being bien educado, to be well educated. In the classroom, we are well educated in the English sense, which is often our brains, our ability to know facts, to read books, and make a cogent Western argument in that Socratic method, which is absolutely essential. For us as Latinos, and I think across many cultures, the notion of being bien educado is to be respectful, to have manners, to hold oneself with dignity and honor.
One of the dominant narratives behind the corporate education agenda is that the U.S. is challenged by increasing numbers of inner-city youth and immigrants with serious cultural and linguistic deficits. What's wrong with this narrative?
It's often, again, a Eurocentric one. It's one in which this is what the curriculum is. Speak English. Know these particular historical facts and things. And what it often does is forget the fact that a child has already been nurtured and has been raised within a community, within a family, among sisters and brothers. We often talk about the fact that when we're working with parents, we say a child's parent is their first teacher. But the reality is, often as soon as that child comes into kindergarten, first grade, we do a little pat on the back to the parent and say, job well done, now we'll take over because we're the professionals. Let's go back to that idea and actually give honor to the fact that parents are their first teacher, and can we in fact say that they continue to be co-teachers with me, the professional who's been credentialed? If we do that, then we no longer see a child's Spanish that they use in the home as a deficit. We now see that as an asset. We no longer look at that cultura mexicana, whatever culture it may be, Greek culture, Chinese culture, as a deficit, something to be added on to with American culture, but actually now becomes the source of great intelligence, wisdom, ways of understanding. I think that the narrative has had a disproportionately negative impact, again, on children of color. Children come with this wealth of knowledge, and then school says, check that at the door. Check your language at the door. Check the assets that would help you. Obviously, here in California, we have, quote, outlawed bilingual education. We've told children, the language by which you have communicated well with your parents, now choose another venue. And the unintended consequence is a child that maybe comes in to a classroom in third or fourth grade, in a matter of quick 3 or 4 years has become much more English dominant than Spanish dominant. And we wonder why there's a drifting and a generational break at home. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, they're in middle school and high school, and they're acting out. Well, they haven't had the same kind of enculturation at home, at school, because language has become now a barrier.
I asked Rochelle Rogers RD what it takes to successfully teach students across difference.
The first answer that people usually say is, you just need cultural competence. But people don't really seem to know what that is. You need to know who you are so that when you go in the classroom and you're facing a group of children, you can come in authentically and say, these are the things I know, and here's how I'm going to help you learn them. And these are the things I don't know, and you're bringing this knowledge in. And so we're going to co-construct knowledge in this classroom. And I think what happens is a lot of times we, as educators, are training future educators to be the expert in the room. And as soon as we stop doing that, then we'll have a lot more success. Because really, our children are coming with a wealth of knowledge, especially now that our children are so savvy technologically. We can't discount that. We have to bring that into the classroom and then grow the knowledge where it is. And that takes a tremendous amount of time to develop. It's a skill that says, I'm not scared to not be the expert in the room. It's also a skill that says, I can also manage 30 to 35 very rambunctious youngsters. And it's a skill that says, I'm going to allow each child the difference and see their differences and acknowledge them and be able to bring them to the fore in the classroom. Those are some really intricate strategies. I love the notion of using videotape in the classroom and being able to sit down with a teacher and say, yes, you were teaching to 15 children, but the 10 over here were disengaged. And what might it take to bring that in? And how do we differentiate? And all of those strategies, it takes a moment. It really, really does. But those that get it, it's gorgeous to see. It's life-affirming.
If educators truly valued the wealth of knowledge and culture students bring to school, what would it actually look like in the classroom? This is Miguel Lopez.
So one of the things that I play with, for instance, is an activity that I call my dichos, or sayings or consejos, bits of wisdom activity. This is a process I've been doing. I've used it all the way from kindergarten up through college. You can go into virtually every classroom, especially elementary, across the nation and see up on the wall a set of classroom rules. But rather than having a list of do's and don'ts, why don't we have a list of ways of being, ways of community building? I'm not certain that the do's and don'ts, don't run, don't eat the paste, raise your hand to talk, are really building community. So could we, for instance, ask children, what wisdom did your parents give you this morning? For instance, every morning when I would walk my son to school, even up until the first years of high school before he was a little too independent for me, I would give him a bit of wisdom. Respect yourself, respect others, work hard, play hard. Those are some very simple kinds of things. Sometimes I would give different ones in Spanish. All of my students bring in on the first few days, the weeks, all of their dichos, the ways that their parents talk to them. Now what I've done is I've made homework, not my work as a teacher that, quote, goes home. I call that schoolwork that goes home. Homework for me is work that can only be accomplished because it requires the participation of the members of the home. I want to talk about homework in the sense that every parent has a story about their immigration. Every parent has a story about what they do in their life. Every parent has a story that they can tell. So this parent, child's first teacher, I keep that concept, and now I have them continue to be the teacher. So it's not just give me the dicho. It's now explain to your child the meaning of the dicho. Where did that dicho come from? Was that from your grandmother, your maternal grandmother? Now I'm doing a family tree activity, which we often do. My point is, I want to start with what I know is already part of the curriculum, homework. I want to start with something that's already part of the curriculum, classroom rules. I want to start with something that's already part of the curriculum, something like a family tree. But now I think of ways of incorporating within that children's culture and values. That becomes then part of my, quote, academic discussion inside the classroom. I want to bring the worlds closer together by asking that the values and the ways of understanding of the home could be part of the, quote, academic work at school, and that academic work could flow back home. It adds to the change in the paradigm because now my parents are the teacher and the classroom teacher is the learner.
Molly Rayner and Dante Clark are co-founders of Raw Talent, a spoken word and performing arts program at the Rye Center in Richmond, California. Listen as they describe how Raw Talent embraces and celebrates the cultures of young people in their community.
I started writing, performing, traveling, and teaching workshops at a young age. I transformed from a shy, passive girl into a confident, outspoken young leader in my community. But while I was thriving, several of my friends, all young black men, dropped out of high school. I remember seeing their essays peppered with red marks, telling them their language was wrong. No one ever taught them the different grammar rules between Standard English and what some referred to as Black English or Ebonics. Their teacher simply called it a mistake, reinforcing the message that their language and therefore they were inferior. For youth of color who grew up in homes where Standard English is not their mother tongue, language can become a prison at school. Their bodies are policed in the street and their words are policed on the page. But if their cultures and home languages are celebrated, they're often able to open up, engage in the learning process, and acquire the code-switching skills needed to succeed. Making space for creative expression in our curriculum is one way to recenter our students in the classroom. Standard grammar rules are thrown out the window. Students have the poetic license to play with language, to explore their emotions and identities. Of course, this is all easier said than done. I was an English teacher for 3 years, so I remember how hard it was to make space for creativity with the pressure of grades, testing, and standards looming over my head. I felt like my success as a teacher was measured by how many of my students got A's. Being a teacher for social justice is challenging, but it's so critical. One teacher can change hundreds of lives. I'm so grateful for all the educators out there working to create empowering spaces for our students. And just remember, if we want our students to take risks in their writing, we have to take risks with our teaching.
If you don't teach the people who they really are, then everything that you're doing is teaching them to assimilate into a culture and a system that devours their existence, like completely, language and everything about us. That's not making no changes. A lot of people I dealt with was teaching me to do the homework and get good grades, but the lessons that I'm learning is full of lies. And you teaching me to regurgitate information in order to pass, but I'm not really learning nothing. And then by the time I get into college and I start taking classes I want to take, then I start realizing the last 22 years of my life has been a lie. So now I have to start all over, and that's a whole nother process. And by then, the battle could be done lost. So many people lies and been misled or taken. I say, understand who you working with, not just that individual, but where they coming from, and build in your curriculum things that will give them the skills to challenge themselves and strengthening those tools that they don't know that they have, bringing that stuff out, making sure it's a lot of community work. You got to get to know the parents, because with Raw Talent, what we do is we try to get to know everybody that's in your family, your friends, your parents, your cousins, etc. We try to get to know who you are and where you coming from, and that help us better understand who we dealing with, and not just in the classroom in that hour, but outside of the classroom. Yeah, bro, it takes a lot of love and compassion. You got to love who you dealing with, and if you love them, then there's certain things that you'll go to lengths of doing. It won't just be stuck in a confined space. Love don't have no boundaries, right? So you got to love the people who you working with. You got to think outside the box. You feel me?
Let's leave it there for today and reflect on the last two programs. We've heard how the corporate education agenda is grounded in a standardized Eurocentric paradigm. The dominant narrative labels students with low test scores as failures, with deficits that must be fixed. Who better to do the job than privatized technocratic programs like Teach for America? They pump thousands of minimally trained, low-paid, temporary teachers into inner-city schools on a condescending mission to raise test scores. Many of them, however well-intentioned, will spend a year or two floundering before moving on to more lucrative careers. Students and families from oppressed communities will pay the price again. The voices we're hearing in this series envision a different paradigm. It fully embraces the wonderfully rich cultures, talents, and communal knowledge that students bring into our schools every day. It's a vision that can only be realized with culturally diverse teachers who empower young people and respect their cultures, families, and communities. Social justice educators have incredibly challenging jobs. Appreciate and support them to keep learning and growing. The humanity of our children and the future of our planet just may depend on it. Next week, we'll continue to explore the paradigms of social justice education and focus especially on the shift from conformity to liberation. Many thanks to today's guests for sharing their profound insights and wisdom. Dr. Chela Delgado, Dr. Sean Genright, Dr. Rochelle Rogers RD, Dr. Miguel Lopez, Molly Rayner, and Dante Clark. Check out the Flashpoints website at flashpoints.net to hear all the programs and the full interviews used to make them. For Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio, I'm Ken Yale. The executive producer of Flashpoints is Dennis Bernstein. Technical director is Mike Biggz.